stuck into this, I just want to start by welcoming everybody back. It's lovely to have you with us from wherever you're joining us. If you've been with us over the past few months, you'll know that now pretty much every few weeks we get together and do a quick dash around the world to try to bring different perspective and different inspiration about what's happening in export markets and what's happening beyond the news headlines, so that as exporters we can try to get a better handle on where our opportunities are, and to remember that no matter what 2020 throws at us, then this, like, everybody's going through this confusion and this chaos in exactly the same time. So today I'm delighted to have some familiar faces coming back to join us, and from pretty much from all corners of the globe. This is a webinar series that is very much by exporters for exporters. We're all trying to navigate that better, more sustainable path through. So the topics we're going to cover today, hopefully will resonate with you all, and will leave you walking into the weekend with a sense of perhaps renewed, or we hope renewed, optimism to take on the world and to win. So first of all, I'd like to welcome back Hamish. Hamish, thank you. I missed you last month, or you missed me. Thanks for stepping in. Do you want to introduce our different panelists here? I'll let them introduce ourselves.
Oh, yeah. Well, look. So we'll let them introduce themselves. So Hunter, on my top left there, would you like to share with people your background? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Good day, everyone. So I'm based in Shanghai. And I'm an importer and distributor of New Zealand meat in China, and we sell directly to the top end food service China wide. So we focus in on venison at the moment, and we have so I'm right at the coalface in regards to what's happening in food service, more or less China wide, especially at the top end. So that's it. And I speak Chinese. Been here for about 13 years, and Shanghai is home.
Fantastic, thank you, Hunter. And over in London, we have Peter. Peter, good evening to you.
Hi, Andy. Good evening. Yes, it's now called Lockdown London as of this morning. So it's Lockdown 2. It's a sequel, and it's much worse than the first one, because it's going to be very boring. So anyway, I wear a few hats in London. I have a business called Newfound. We support technology companies coming to the market from overseas markets. A number of Kiwi companies we've brought over here successfully, and know that landscape incredibly well. I also sit on the global board of Kia, Kiwi Expat Association, UK chairman, and we're going through a process of bringing in a new regional director. And things are getting interesting here, so I look forward to talking more about that.
Let's going off. It's great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us, Peter. Richard, I'll let you explain what the view is behind you, because I think you might win it for the best location of the day.
Yeah, I'm getting a bit of hate mail for that, because of that particular view. Look. That view behind me is the North Shore of Oahu, Hawaii, where we have decamped from Colorado, which was a wonderful place to live in and of itself. But after 7 months of lockdown there, and no schooling, and then suboptimal digital schooling, it was time to get the kids out of there and somewhere a little more normal. And Hawaii presents as not a bad B plan, so that's why we're here. But we're in the States specifically because we've launched a business. It's a Kiwi business called Noho. It's a direct-to-consumer furniture business where we're trying to create extraordinary ergonomic furniture made from sustainable materials. In the first instance, largely upcycled waste plastic, and it's all direct-to-consumer, which I happen to feel is a great and efficient way of tackling the US market.
Oh, it's like
and the great thing about it being a digital business is we can do it from anywhere, as you can see.
I'm going to make the most inappropriate link here, because I'm going to just go back to Auckland here and say a very good morning to Guy Horrocks, who's sitting on the floor in a semi-furnished flat he's just moved into. Guy, it's like
I just wanted to provide contrast to Richard, just because people can see both sides of how the cookies crumbled. I was in a similar move, because I've been in New York for 8 to 10 years, and selling mainly marketing tech software and software as a service with a few different startups. I moved back to New Zealand, and it was actually on Waiheke for about 4 months, which I had a little shadows of your lifestyle, Richard, which was really good, but Sadly, there's only so much time you can spend in a borrowed house in Waiheke. So now I'm on a unfurnished floor in Auckland.
It's like we're covering all the bases, Guy. Thank you so much. I look forward to picking up with you in a little bit. And finally, crossing to Santa Barbara, David, a very good morning to you.
Yeah, hey guys. My name's Dave Nelley, and I've been based offshore selling New Zealand fruit around North America and Asia for the last 25 years, based in Seattle, Singapore, and then the last 20 years in Vancouver, BC. In July, during social unrest and pandemic, moved my family to Santa Barbara, and I work for a startup company for a year and a half now called Apeel Sciences. We're in the nanotechnology space, extending the shelf life of fresh produce.
Thank you very much. We look forward to learning a little bit more about that as we go through the morning. We're going to lose no time and just get straight into business here. And Peter, can we start with you for the view from London? Like you are, it is London in lockdown. It's looking pretty grim. We've got Brexit around the corner. The border is apparently now the top of Kent. It's like all we hear is chaos. What's the situation on the ground with you right now?
Can I say how long do I have? The UK marketplace is clearly going through a lot of changes, and Brexit. Let's start with Brexit. Brexit's happened. The trade agreement with the EU is nearing completion. I'm not going to say it's going to complete, but certainly it's nearing completion. There's a few sticking points over fisheries and a couple of other sort of level playing field areas. And listen, these things always go down to the wire. And so therefore, if I was a betting man, which I am, it's going to happen before the new year, probably in the next few weeks. Otherwise, it's going to be upsetting to both the EU and the UK. So I think we regarded Brexit as being more or less a done deal, and therefore, the UK will not have to park trucks back up to Kent. So I suppose moving on from Brexit, the FTA that's been negotiated at the moment between the UK and New Zealand has now reached sort of stage 3. And my moles inside New Zealand House, although they're working from home at the moment, are telling me some encouraging things. And I think we can safely assume it's going to be a much better situation for bilateral trade between New Zealand and the UK. We're going to see, I think, a lot of opportunity for exporters coming into the UK across multiple sectors. And the tariffs in some cases removed and some tariffs will be reduced, but it's certainly a lot better than it was when the UK was in the EU. So I think if I was an exporter in NZ at the moment, I'll be keeping a close eye on what's going to be released in the FTA in coming months. And in fact, I spoke to the new High Commissioner, B. Corrie, last week, and his job is to sort of get everything prepared for that. He's very busy, the team's very busy, and they're staffing up. And I think that says something quite positive. If they're looking to staff up in London, it means that there's going to be more activity. So ultimately, the FTA should be great for New Zealand exporters. But of course, getting up here and sort of sussing out what the opportunities are, it's a bit tough at the moment. So until the flight corridors are opened, until borders are more permeable, then I think people are going to have to sort of work with organisations like mine or with the trade organisations to try and figure stuff out. So you've got to do your homework still, and you've got to sort of understand what the opportunities are, but also what the risks are too.
From your contacts on the insides, it's like, how far away do you think we are from clarity or any inkling of what might actually be inside that agreement with the UK?
Honestly, I have asked that question a few times, and everyone sort of said, "Well, we can't say." And the reality is, the UK is focusing its resources around the EU and probably the US and Australia, probably ahead of us as well. So I wouldn't say the A team's focusing on New Zealand just yet, but we'll be shortly thereafter. So I would expect something, Q1, maybe Q2, if we have a good wind.
So actually the period of hiatus between Brexit happening and the borders getting clogged and the clarity of an agreement may actually just be a number of months. So we're not looking at the need to try to park thinking about the UK for anything more than a few months, just for sheer practical purposes?
Listen, I mean, the UK is a sizable market. It's almost 70 million people, and they are very good at buying stuff. And, certainly, if you're a New Zealand exporter, you should certainly consider the UK as being one of your first overseas markets, because, the spending power here is pretty significant, and they're early adopters, and they love their foods, they love their wines. So everything that New Zealand produces, I would suggest, will be in demand here, provided the quality is good, provided the prices are good, and provided, I suppose the customer service and everything else that surrounds that is to what we'd expect coming out of New Zealand. So, not everyone will win, or not everyone will do well, but certainly I think the opportunity is going to be much bigger.
So what's you mentioned before the complexity of having to work through intermediaries and just not being able to physically have enough touch points with the market before you commit. With your Kia hat on, then how's the network inside the UK helping exporters to try to navigate through that challenge?
Well, the Kia network is incredibly strong globally, and it does open doors. And Kia is also partly funded by the New Zealand government, very close relationship, working closely relationship with NZTE. And so when a company comes up either directly into Kia or via NZTE, it should get access to the Kiwi network up here. Now, the unknown sort of answer to the question about how many Kiwis have flown the nest and gone back to gone back home in recent months, we just don't know yet. I know personally quite a few have gone back, some for a short period and will return. But whatever happens, the network is still incredibly strong here, inside industry, inside government, inside I suppose the various points of access required. So, the Kia network is designed to sort of support companies coming in there to, I suppose, try and sort of find out how to go and where to go. That's Kia's new strategy. We've got a new CEO who started just a number of months ago, Tony Truslove. She's doing an amazing job. I believe Kia's profile in New Zealand is really increasing significantly because of the returning Kiwi story. So Kia is only going to get stronger and better, and very helpful for the network.
So just on a final point, with your you hold quite an interesting perspective inside that market, because from a tech sector point of view, you're working with people who are building businesses, but also with the people who are investing inside those businesses. So are there any interesting changes in the way that investment is coming into the UK at the moment that gives us a closer indication about what medium-term sentiments might be from an investor point of view?
Yeah, I mean, the VC community has certainly slowed a little, but there's still a lot of money out here. And of course, the angel network is phenomenally strong, particularly because of various tax benefits that private investors gain under UK regulations. And I've been involved in a number of angel investments in recent months that have gone very well. There's a Kiwi-owned business, albeit it's London headquartered, called Rebecca Page. It does sewing patterns for the world, and their biggest market is the US. A good portion of their investors are from New Zealand. So ultimately, there's a very healthy investor landscape here. It's not the US, but certainly in European terms, it's number one by far, and it's still very active, and there's more money being raised all the time.
Right. So I'm getting a sense that actually behind the immediate looming chaos, then actually there is sentiment is still chaos true.
Yeah. Listen, chaos is temporary, class is permanent. So it's it's definitely going to be a chaotic few months, but it's the whole history of London and the tapestry.
Yeah, indeed it is. I think we might just thank you, Peter. We're going to jump over to you, Hunter, if we may, and just spin around and look at things from a China market perspective. Now, it's like getting clarity on China at the present moment is a little bit hard. But some news that's coming even this week is quite remarkable. It's like China's Southern Airlines is reporting a profit for Q3. And like airline traffic's back up to what it was year on year. It feels like we've got normality in many different parts of it. What's the reality on the ground from your perspective?
China, I'd say, will be back to normal. I've been living in Shanghai all year. Yeah, we sort of shut down February, March. By April, things started to open back up. And then May, June, we were sort of about 80, 90%. And then, July, August, September, a lot of my clients, the restaurant scene here, July and August traditionally is where everyone goes overseas on holiday. Obviously, they couldn't travel worldwide. So, restaurants here were pumping. The tourism industry here, even some hotels like Sanya, which is the south of China, an island, supposed to be the Hawaii of China. Yeah. They've been running at 90-95% occupancy right through to 100. They're short staffed down there. So, the economy here, there's big hits across the board, but it's tracking along nicely. Travel, there's no restrictions on travel within China. There is a track and trace. There's lots of systems in place to make sure if there is a problem and you've been to a problem area, then you go get tested. Yeah. Great example is that there was an issue in Beijing. Took 3 weeks to test 8 million people. Now, and then a month later, there was an issue and they closed down parts of Beijing. A month later in Qingdao, a similar issue with COVID. They tested 10 million people in 5 days and didn't close the city down. So the systems and the ability for the Chinese government and across the board to respond to COVID issues is improving. So it gives everyone confidence. So, people are back, opening up restaurants, reinvesting. Office buildings that were kind of emptied out earlier in the year are refull, filling back up, and things are trucking along pretty good here.
So that shifts like that in terms of the disposable income from going overseas and from holidays and still having more money in your pockets. I mean, we got Singles Week next week, if my understanding is correct, coming through, which is traditionally the biggest the biggest shopping day. What's the projections on the ground about whether 2020 Singles Day is actually going to top the charts, or are we going to see something a little bit different?
Oh no, everyone's predicting that it'll probably be up about 20 or 30%. I think Singles Days, it's actually longer this year. They kicked off on the 1st of November with the pre-sale, and then it sort of goes for about 20 days now. So it's not just one day, but you can they'll break the records again. And the main reason is that it's really cheap to sell something. It's really easy to sell something cheap in China. So if you're discounting something by 30, 40, 50%, the Chinese are going to be all over it. So it's massive. But then also, retail and everything across the board is not going to be up as much, so they're going to spend more on Single Day and probably less at the local shopping mall or, or less in the next few months. But, it's going to be massive again.
So we've got money and mobility starting to flow back through the economy. So this is an absolute rare treat to talk to somebody about food service that's back on track again. It's like how's the whole food service sector inside China worn the path for the last 6 or 8 months? Have there been many going out of business, or are you just seeing the sector as it was just rising back again and returning to business as usual?
I know early in the year, a lot of restaurants that were probably on the edge financially closed, and that happened pretty quickly. Everyone that sort of managed to survive is now doing very well. So there's been a bit of a clean out, and then of the companies that were sort of sitting on the edge financially, there's a real struggle for 2, 3, 4 months, because the other thing here, there was no support from the government on anything. Apart from if you are renting in a government-owned building, you got a little bit of rent relief. Outside of that, there was nothing else. So people made a decision pretty quick. It was, I was talking to a restaurant owner the other day who owns a very high-profile Chinese chef. Before the pandemic, he owned 26 restaurants around Shanghai. He's now down to 16, but he's just reopened another one, so he's going on to 17. So he's back into investing and reopening. But he moved very quickly. He said he could see what was going to happen. He closed a lot of his Japanese sort of fresh, seafood sort of places down quickly, and then back up. So across the board, even in Beijing, I was talking to a guy that they're starting to reopen restaurants again, like as a new investment. So it's happening everywhere. And then the other thing, you look at the hotel industry. The hotel industry here, if you're involved in business or business traveling, then they've been, they had to change their business model. If you're in the tourism spots like Hainan, Qingdao, Yunnan, Xi'an, the big places where Chinese people like to go for tourism, they've been flat out. I knew there's a guy I used to know who, well, he's left China now, who used to be involved in the banyan tree group, and they're in sort of exotic places around China and remote areas, very expensive hotel, 20 odd locations, and they'll be fully booked all year. So it's sort of, some places are doing very well, some places aren't.
So this feels like an absolute sitter for our own primary sector and for our food and drink manufacturers at a very, very premium level. What does it take now to be able to take advantage of the return of premium hospitality in China?
You need to move past being just from New Zealand. The New Zealand flag, the New Zealand label will get you in the door, but you got to offer something else. It's not and that's across the board. It doesn't matter if you're a European product or an American product in any sector. You can't just sell on, the New Zealand brand and the New Zealand image is very good. It's very positive, but then consumers are saying, right, what else? You can't just say, hey, we're from clean green New Zealand. It's wonderful. This is our product. You've got to have something beyond that. Is it a good eating experience? Is it healthy? Is it, you got to go beyond it, because the consumers have moved past that. Everyone knows that New Zealand is a good place. It's done well with COVID. Great. Okay. But you got to move beyond that, and pretty quickly, because they're looking for more than just foreign products. Because to be fair, a lot of local products, meat, seafood, everything have, during the pandemic, people have been switching from imported to local because they see it as safer.
So just on that final point, then it's like the window of opportunity here, because everybody's like, this is a rare opportunity to have the hospitality sector anywhere in the world opening up again. Is this a really small window, do you think, for premium food and drink in this country to capitalize on?
Well, no, it's not a small window. It was like this before. There hasn't been a so-called pivot in China. It's just the market's changed. The market changes here pretty quickly. The other thing is that there's real pressure on price. So you've got to, the prices are coming down across the board. The pork industry here, the local pork, it's predicted for the pork prices to move down. So that's going to drag everything down. So there's real pressure on price. The other thing is that you've got more compliance, COVID testing. There's a lot of happening in there behind the scenes. There's a lot of talk about, the Chinese consumers want safe, trusted products, but they're not prepared to pay for traceability. So, there's a whole talk about blockchain into China and stuff. Yeah, but as long as it doesn't cost more, at the moment, no one is prepared to pay extra for traceability, but they want it, So there's a lot of added costs going in there, which the consumer doesn't want to pay for, but is a requirement. So, it's a challenging environment, but that's China, and there's still plenty of opportunities.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hunter. That was brilliant. So we're going to switch now and go around towards the US, or actually more towards Auckland, to be fair. I mean, Guy, you're normally based in New York with lots of furniture. We understand normally. It's like I know Rich has got his eyes on the updates from CNN on the election, but right now we've just seen crisis on crisis on crisis coming through in the markets being a little bit jittery. Your world inside B2B sales, inside corporate, what's been happening over the last couple of months since we've seen you, and is optimism coming back? What does it look like?
Yeah, I think for a little bit of background, I sold a company in 2018 it was a large MarTech company, and the last 2 years been working on a new data infrastructure product called Solve. And we actually came to market to start our sort of go-to-market strategy in March, which is possibly not the best timing. So March, April were pretty bad, just for both reaching out on the sales side. Just so many meetings got cancelled, pushed, people weren't replying. And then things really picked up in the US coming into kind of like late April, May, June. It sort of felt largely back to normal, at least with the e-com side of things, e-com market. Publishers are getting a lot of traffic. Advertising revenue's down though. So it's been kind of interesting watching that balance across the board. Facebook and stuff had pretty low advertising months for a couple of months there, even though traffic was high. We actually just completed a fundraise about a month or so ago. We talked to probably like 30 VCs in America. We landed 2 VCs there and picked up a couple of local sort of things, me being back in New Zealand. So Movac and Airtree out of Australia and Icehouse invested. So we've raised about $5.5 million US on this new company under a seed round, which is a little trickier when you're sort of pre-revenue or like early stage revenue. So we definitely felt like there were jitters in the market for a couple of months, both on the sales side and the VC side, where people were just like very risk averse for a couple of months as the sort of thing, dust settled. And if you had that rock star business that's growing month on month with good revenue, like, you know, especially in the SaaS space, like you're always going to find an investor. There's enough money around. But I think the early stage VC stuff, there was just like a lot more scrutiny. You know, like I think we raised our first round off a napkin just based off previous successes and backgrounds. This time we had to work for it quite hard to just sort of get it over the line. So I'd say that. The other thing is I've probably invested in about a dozen direct-to-consumer companies, mainly based in New York, a couple in California. And I think we've seen the D2C revenue really expand. You know, companies that were traditionally doing wholesale, you know, like shoe companies or chocolate, food and beverage, there's a bunch of different ones I'm in. They sort of saw like some decline in some of their kind of wholesalers and B2B side of their business, but it was kind of made up for by a large increase in direct to consumer sales. So yeah, the chocolate factory that I invested in New York is probably 300% up on e-commerce sales this year, which is pretty awesome.
It's been an amazing time to see like the D2C finally fully come of age and for people to be confident. Just passing to you, Richard, again, because it's like your world's in the US alongside Guy. I understand the last couple of months have been really interesting from a channel development point of view for you and for Noho.
Yeah, look, I was just reflecting then as Guy was speaking that I should have reached out to Guy sooner. Actually, I've been meaning to, oddly, and it'd be good to compare notes. Yeah, look, the last few months have been fascinating. I think you know what we're experiencing in these few days right now is a very, very interesting lens on the United States. So I've always said, typically in doing business with the States over the last kind of 20 odd years, that you've got to wrap your head around the fact that America is 50 different countries, and each of those countries has different dynamics in the way that, you know, Australia or the UK does. And I think what we're seeing in the last few days is that America is really 2 countries, and Trump is going to roll on as president of Red America for quite some time, and quite possibly be problematic. And I think that massive schism is something that New Zealand exporters need to be conscious of. Certainly, in launching Noho here, to echo Guy's thoughts, we launched in April, and it couldn't have been a worse time in some regards. So, you know, it crucified our launch budget. It crucified our launch week in New York, where we had a whole lot of media events set up. Crucified that because most of the media got furloughed. What that meant for our budget is that then we had to lean on paid digital to buy eyeballs, where you'd expect the media to do that heavy lifting around awareness, the awareness part of your funnel. And we wound up spending about 80% of our dollars just getting people at the top of the funnel and then trying to work them down over the subsequent few months. But we also had to pivot furiously from our original proposition being around, you know, yes, sustainable, brilliant ergonomic furniture, but the launch product, the hero product being this extraordinarily comfortable dining chair. You know, people in America haven't really been socializing or dining particularly, and the market for dining chairs has certainly cratered, other than cheapies from Wayfair and Amazon. So we had to pivot to a sort of work from home proposition, which has worked for us. To echo some of Guy's comments, you know, D2C has been really, really where you needed to be over the last few months if you're going to compete at all, you know, especially as a fledgling business. So in some regards, it's played into our hands. But in other regards, and we've seen this mostly in the last month and a half, the chaos that is America right now has been very, very difficult to navigate. So where we got out of the gates remarkably strongly, and, you know, got to a place at the end of August where we were getting ROAS of 3, you know, which is pretty phenomenal for a brand new brand, brand new product with relatively constrained budgets. everything sort of fell off a cliff a bit in September, and a lot of D2C businesses that we're in a network with, they way more established than us, had exactly the same sort of experience, and we've had to kind of peel back and work our way back into the market, and we're sort of picking our way back up again now. But if you look at what the reasons were, you know, a lot of it was to do with social unrest, a lot of it was to do with financial insecurity for people, with the CARES Act rolling off, so people were concerned about where their dollars were coming from. And the biggest influence at a macro level has been the electioneering. So out of the back of the RNC and DNC conventions in August, we saw between the two of them 10 million separate creative assets drop in September, all algorithmically driven, with RNC and DNC realizing they really couldn't get out and have conventions in quite the same way, so they're trying to do it all digitally. And that just did a bunch of things for a business like us. It quadrupled the cost of our ads. It reduced the impact of our ads by 4 times roughly, and it made it harder to get reach because bandwidth was so consumed in a content sense by all of this political advertising. And I guess that's the other thing that everybody in New Zealand who is thinking about coming into the States needs to be conscious of. But D2C, I think, is a really powerful way to enter the States. There's a couple of things I'd mention though in summary of the comments I've just made. One is that rather than focusing on all of America or even just picking your way through the 50 states, the areas that are most attuned to New Zealand and the way New Zealanders think and the way New Zealanders and particularly D2C businesses work are on the coasts. They're the more progressive thinkers, the East Coast and the West Coast, and you can probably narrow your focus to those areas, which is useful to know because you can narrow your ad spend to those areas. But there was a second point, and it's now just gone. So I'll blame the Hawaii sun.
But when that point comes back, Guy, is this cloud? I mean, just going back to the 10 million political assets dropping into the market in a matter of 2 or 3 weeks, is that had the same follow-on effect for your D2C businesses at the moment?
Yeah, I say it's quite interesting. Like one friend's company is Fix and Fog Peanut Butter in Wellington, and they actually they were looking at the East and West Coast, so they make awesome peanut butter, and it's kind of like, you know, high end, you know, they sort of do flavors, and it's sort of, you know, not your sort of standard Skippies or Kraft or some of those US ones. And in some way it's been an interesting dynamic because that market's worth $2 billion in terms of peanut butter consumption in America. So it's a really big pot. They looked at Australia first, and then they sort of found that, you know, it was basically the same cost to get into Australia, which was higher competitive, lower margins than it was to get into the US with a much higher total addressable market. So they took the plunge, and they actually were going to set up a little window on the coast where, you know, there's a better sort of, I suppose, synergy between cultures and stuff potentially. And they actually ended up getting stocked by a distributor into the large supermarkets in Texas. And they ended up setting up a window in Texas with a Kiwi friend of theirs who's running it. But it's been quite successful, even breaking in there. I suppose it depends on the product. Like that's a relatively cheap product. It's not like a high-end, you know, chair, which is, you know, hundreds of dollars. It's, you know, $7 or something. So, you know, in those kind of like food consumable range. So they've sort of done quite well. They dipped the toe in the market first by actually selling over Amazon, where they sold it at, I think, 2 or 3 times the price of the New Zealand product. So you go to Countdown or New World and you can buy a jar of Fix and Fog peanut butter for like $6-7 New Zealand. They were selling it at $14.99 US last year as a trial. So massively, you know, 3 times the price. And they actually sold $1 million of peanut butter through Amazon last year. So they took a haircut on working with a third party for listing, 3PL, distribution, delivery, fulfillment, because they just sent a big, pallets of it to a person that kind of handled all that stuff. But it was a good test where they sort of didn't have to worry about any of it, and they just sort of used it as a trial market prior to entering. And so their goal was like not to continue to sell at Amazon, where Amazon's taking a big cut and this third party taking a cut, but it is to try and build a big brand in the US. So I think that one's been an interesting one where, I generally would agree with Richard's comments of like the coast, you kind of find like a lot more common ground, and it's sort of, they speak a similar language than some of the other areas. But, there's still those markets. And if you see the election, even though it looks kind of polarizing with these two countries. You dive into a state like Texas, and even then it was maybe 45-46% for Biden. Like these urban areas like even Dallas and Austin were actually skewing more towards Democrat than Republican. So there's been a big dynamic sort of shift in some of these urban areas where there's been a large amount of growth, and those people are, because of the pandemic, shopping a lot more online and used to home deliveries. So I think overall, a lot of these brands I've sort of been involved with have seen, just really great growth. There's been some very unusual outcomes, like my chocolate factory, Rata in Brooklyn. They got a little bit screwed over by Amazon and Whole Foods because during the start of the pandemic, they prioritized essential goods. And so high-end chocolate was not deemed an essential good. And so their delivery times that Amazon would give them went from 24-hour delivery window to 2 weeks. And so suddenly overnight, just screwed, like a huge part of their revenue stream coming through because they're in every Whole Foods in America. So there's been some unusual shifts and kind of unpredictable outcomes here and there. But I think overall, it's just accelerated the transition to online just dramatically, and if you can move quickly on that, there's huge opportunities.
No, this is like it's a perfect.
That was actually the second. Sorry, and Guy actually pretty much touched on the second point I was going to make, which was, but I'll just expand it slightly, which is the social movement throughout the United States. It's been happening for a bunch of years because the tier 1 cities have become so expensive that younger folk, the zillennials can't afford to live there really anymore. So the San Franciscos, the Chicagos, the New Yorks, the Philadelphias, Los Angeles, they're moving out of those areas and they're taking their value sets with them. And so you're seeing these little sort of spots of going blue in previously deeply red areas, but which are more affordable. Austin, Texas is a classic. Guy just mentioned. Nashville, Tennessee, don't forget. Atlanta, Georgia. There's sort of even Sacramento, which used to be a godforsaken wind bowl and is now really a vibrant city with all the young hospitality workers going there to work there. And so I guess that's the caveat to what I was saying before about focusing on the coast. To Guy's point, there are these little sort of hotspots of opportunity outside of those areas where it's red. There is a massive movement and an embracing of Trump's version of nationalism, which says, buy local, don't buy these horrible foreign brands. How dare they be here?
Yeah,
so that's just something to be conscious of.
The interesting thing that you're reflecting there is that we shouldn't take our own preconceptions for granted anymore. In fact, what you think is probably going to be the opposite, and because consumers have changed. And David, if I can just move to you, like from at a primary level and at a grocery level, you've probably seen more consumer change than anybody else. It's like you're intricately involved with moving primary products and produce into grocery for mass consumption in the US. What's happened to produce sales over the last few months?
Yeah, no, business is booming. Retailers are making money hand over fist. Gross sales are huge, whether it's Walmart, Costco, or Kroger. Even in a time of recession, it's a good place to be doing business, because when people eat out less and they eat at home, they tend to buy a lot more. When I think back to COVID, at the start, the supply chain was disrupted and there was a lot of essential goods going through on the retail side. They were short-staffed. They were wondering how to safely staff their operations. And the supply chain really suffered. There was a lot of trucks that were being used for things like toilet paper and hand sanitizer. But food is important. People have to eat. So we also saw it affected at the supply side. We install our technology with growers at their pack houses, and suddenly, when you have a pack house with 250 people and half of them get COVID, things just shut down. The operations had to distance. They became way less efficient. It took a lot of supply chain time, whether it was meat or anything else, to deal with the human safety aspects, and then maybe go up to 3 shifts in what they would normally accomplish in 1 shift. So I think we're at a steady state now. we have noticed that people are shopping in larger quantities with less frequency. That is a real nod to quality. If you have quality produce that lasts longer, that's good. People are spending less on exotic holidays and spending more on their houses. And Richard is exactly right. You know, I've just cashed out of the Vancouver housing market, which is a little bit like Auckland, and thinking I'd come to Santa Barbara and find a cheap little batch to live in. No. Everyone from New York and LA and San Francisco and Chicago are already here because they don't need to work from their office. So real estate has really ramped up. And because of that, you know, there's a lot of capital floating around. People have banked a lot of money through either on their own rising capital investments in real estate or housing, and they're spending less. And I drove from Vancouver to Santa Barbara, that's down the coast, in July. We couldn't get a hotel anywhere. You know, we had a few holdups at the border, so it took a while to, we never quite got organized to make pre-bookings, but there was no space because Americans are staying within the country because they're not welcome anywhere else, quite frankly. So there's a really good opportunity in retail right now. Food service has been decimated. They're in real trouble unless you're fast food. And there is a real opportunity for leadership out of New Zealand. I think Richard is exactly right. You know, the spots in blue, I suppose, look wistfully across the Pacific to New Zealand with the leadership, the way that science is being listened to, and the way that COVID has been handled. And anything coming out of New Zealand right now is seen as on a bit of a pedestal. It's a really great opportunity to come in.
Just I'd love your reflections on this, please, Peter, if we can, from London. I mean, plainly we've been through an election cycle here, and we have a new government that's about to be ensconced. Is there anything positive about the stability and positivity, I guess, that's now emanating from the beehive and from the country here?
Listen, I mean, the profile of the PM in New Zealand is incredibly high here. I mean, she's you know, often mentioned in the national press, and obviously the recent election victory, you know, made mainstream news. So you know, I think that certainly is very encouraging. And I think you know, with the FTA, you know, New Zealand is not just sort of left out of discussions. It's always quite prominent. So I think New Zealand has earned its right to be, you know, at or near the top table because of the quality of its leadership in many aspects of politics and I think world trade and just, you know, I suppose quality of life. There's a number of factors out there that New Zealand seems to be quite close to the top. And quite frankly, you know, brand New Zealand is held in high esteem here. So I think having the sort of New Zealand flag behind you, or whatever you decide to wear, you know, it's still looked on very favourably, and you know, I think probably more so than ever. Particularly, you know, quashing the COVID is also seen as a positive thing here. Mm-hmm. But obviously, going there on holiday is a little challenging.
It certainly is. From a China perspective, Hunter, is like our relations and understanding getting closer, or any change at all?
I think things are tracking on very nicely with the relationships politically between New Zealand and China. Yeah, we have a big presence on the ground by the government. We have consulates in Shanghai, Guangzhou, Chengdu. So yeah, there's a lot happening in behind the scenes. I was just at a breakfast the other day with the head of MPI out of Beijing, and then the Zespri CEO came into town. So there's a lot happening. So we're in a very good space. We're probably at the exact opposite end compared to Australia. Australia are not in a good space, and it hasn't been for a long time. You know, you look at the relationships between China and the US, and they're two big boys sort of duking it out, and you know, they play by different rules. If anyone wants to follow what the US is doing in China, the Chinese will just stop them. So yeah, a classic example is that Canadian pork cannot be imported into China at the moment, and it's mainly because of political issues, but there's a pork shortage in China. So, Australia is not in a good place long term, but New Zealand is, which is good.
Yeah, absolutely. So Guy, from your perspective, especially from a B2B point of view, it's like we from a produce perspective, then brand New Zealand's amazing because clean, green food, it all makes perfect sense. When it comes to smarts and to IP, is there any benefit that you're seeing from the growing equity in a national brand?
Yeah, I think it's huge. Like, I think as Hunter and David's just talked on, like, I think brand New Zealand is it's as good as probably it's ever been, or it's close to it. I think even me entering the US market 8 years ago with a software product, like, I felt like in New York, at least, like, we were kind of, you couldn't almost come from a better country in terms of their perceptions and willingness to open doors. I think I've talked about it a lot, which is just, we tried to, when we had a mobile agency years ago, we tried to sign TVNZ in Auckland, and we lost out to a agency who had never built mobile apps before, and we'd built apps for HBO and all these things through the agency. And so we lost to TVNZ, arrived in New York, and 6 months later, we signed CNN and Time as our first US client to run all their 2012 elections polling data and mobile apps. And so it was kind of a strange one where I actually felt at that stage our own internal perceptions of being open to young entrepreneurs or technology or innovation or something that might be seen as risky or whatever, or new or different. We were actually more closed off to our own people, I felt, in the software space, to startups in New Zealand than we were entering a completely different market where you've got no network, which is kind of crazy because everyone sort of relies on their relationship selling, especially in software. Enterprise software is all about relationship selling and stuff. So that was an interesting dynamic for me to learn, where it was almost like you can't make it in Auckland, but you can make it in New York, which is unusual. It's changed a bit now, and I think coming back here, I think the VC market's awesome here in terms of just there's a lot more cash, there's a lot more angel investment, at least in the seed stage, where when I tried to raise in 2013, people were trying to give me like, what's your 5 to 10 year discounted cash flow model on a new startup, which I hadn't even sold a product yet, which is just insane. And they were giving me a valuation of 3 mil. And then I think, 6 months later, we raised 2.5 million on a seed round US in the US at a 8.5 million pre-US valuation. So over 3 times the valuation, but with Google, versus local VCs. So that's 7 years ago. But, coming back now, we've taken New Zealand money and they've given us a better valuation, and they're less risk averse and willing to take a chance on, you trying to do a big idea into a big market. So I think the dynamics have changed a lot, but I think selling software is actually playing into our advantage. 1, the reputation of the country. 2, you don't actually have to be in market as much anymore. I would say if you want to win big in the US, you need to be in market. You need someone in on the ground. It really ideally needs to be like a co-founder or someone on that kind of level. You can't just hire locally a salesperson and think you're going to build $1 billion company that way. And you're sort of chancing it. So I think now that everyone's used to doing Zoom calls, as crappy as they are compared to meeting in person, it's actually broken down the barrier to get sales calls way easier. I think the downside I have is in the relationship selling at the enterprise end of SaaS, is just I rely heavily on building large communities. So I'll run CTO breakfasts, CMO dinners, like running events, coffee meetups, tech meetups. And so I've built a lot of my success personally from that kind of like, hand-to-hand sort of meeting people, building long-term relationships. And that's a little bit harder over Zoom calls. You might get the call, but it's suddenly become a little bit more transactional in nature because they sort of know you're pitching your product, straight away. So yeah, there's a few changing dynamics, but I think in actual fact, New Zealand's, it's the next couple of years plus the expats coming back. I think we're in like a really good spot.
We are. We're certainly adapting to not being in the same room and to all the challenges that are there. And certainly like Guy with your flat white meetups and everything else across for Kiwis in New York and everything else, and with Peter and Kia across the globe. It's like the team of 6 million has never been more important than it is today. What I'm worried about actually goes back to something that Hunter said before about relying too much on the perception of brand New Zealand and not thinking enough about what else your product actually delivers. I mean, like Richard, from your point of view, like you effectively exporting Kiwi IP and then building your own channel. It's like, do you think a strengthening brand New Zealand could actually cause complacency in lots of organizations?
Sorry, can you just ask that last bit again, Andrew?
Do you think it's like, do you think there's a risk here that's the strengthening brand New Zealand and the strength of our network across the globe, it actually makes us a little bit complacent and too reliant on being New Zealanders and not enough about the IP that we build into our products to make the products on their own world beating, not just who we are, where we're from?
I don't know how to answer that. I think that there has long been a propensity, I think, for New Zealand companies to do one of two things, fall into one of two schools, sitting in New Zealand. Either the rest of the world is just a bit big and a bit hard, and I don't know how to break into America. And how do I break America is a common question I've been asked over the years. And you have to sort of peel it back to, well, hang on, just 50 countries, and there's lots of different cities, and it's the same approach as you would take to Australia, but just etc. Either that camp or the camp which says, I'm going to go there and I'm going to tell them I'm from New Zealand and that's going to work wonders, and I'm going to just, burst out of the gates. And I think neither of those are accurate. I think, just to echo some Guy's comments and Peter's comments, brand New Zealand has never been in better shape globally than it is right now. And the critical element of that is trust, I think. So, New Zealanders have long found it relatively easy to kind of lubricate meetings and create relationships in other markets, because we're sort of inoffensive, we're smiley, we're open, we're honest, and no one knows really how to place us in their usual cohort and hierarchy, social hierarchy. So we kind of sail through all of those machinations. But that only goes so far, right? But right now, saying you're from New Zealand brings with it this kind of set of underlying values and perceptions that I think are incredibly valuable from the perspective of crystallizing business. And that's what I think New Zealand brands need to think about. So, I belong to a little investment group, and we're looking at another little project at the moment. And the question came up yesterday, given where New Zealand's at right now in terms of its perception around the world and the ongoing perception of purity and cleanliness, should that form a part of the brand? And we all concluded, well, yeah. I mean, we've got these values, these values, common values we have in New Zealand, which stand us in really good stead when we focus on the values. When we just focus on telling the story that we're from New Zealand and think that that's enough, we fall down flat. But focusing on the values, the shared values that I think are very powerful globally and are held in high regard, and focus on those elements of New Zealandness that play well offshore, which is openness and trust and honesty and preparedness to sit down and do business over coffee, then I think things go a lot better for us. It's a sort of a long-winded answer to your question, Andy. I don't know if really I got to the nub of it.
Oh, so it was great. So I just want to turn to Dave if I can there, because we have an analogy here that it's not about saying where you're from, it's about understanding how to align the values. I mean, Dave, your world is with the biggest supermarkets in the US. How on earth, for a producer, could we start to think about applying some of that insight from Richard's to help us to practically grow and to get more traction into corporates of their gargantuan scale?
Yeah, no, Richard, you came, summarize things really well. I think right now, think about it. The US is insular again, right? No one's traveling. Everyone's inward looking, especially today. And you come along with New Zealand, it's a ticket of intrigue and curiosity that gets you in the door. And if you can't export to the States right now, I dare say you never will. Like, it's wide open to new ideas and wide open and curious about, okay, what, New Zealand? Okay, all right. You got, what, you have peanut butter? All right, well, tell me about that. Versus, hey, I've already got 23 brands of peanut butter. I need another one like a hole in the head. So right now that the timing is good, I would encourage you to think about it as all of the values that Richard surmised there that are really starting to be really well encapsulated by some large exporters like Zespri. They're powering the way. I think about our own company, founded by people who want to feed another 2 billion people within 30 years by making food last longer and getting more efficient. Edeka in Germany, are just eating that up. Why? Because it aligns with their values. Same with Kroger. They just gave us the badge to put on their Simple Truth organic brand, which is worth $3 billion in organic sales to them. We're the intel inside that makes their their brand more powerful. So you come along with heaped spoonfuls of Kiwi humility that I hope still comes natural, and you use that authenticity, and I think it resonates with brands that are really reaching out. And don't forget, 51, maybe 52% of North America are thirsty for that authenticity. And I think there's a real opportunity to power some of these big brands forward. So our way in with Kroger, for instance, $1 billion company, is we align with their values about zero hunger, zero waste. And it's great to have values, but when they're a driving part of your business, look at Walmart, the big evil empire, have just announced that they will become a completely regenerative company within the next 20 years. So that means all of their fleet of trucks is moving towards alternative energy. They will have a completely regenerative business under the leadership of their current CEO. That's really substantial. If you can power in behind that with the clean green New Zealand grass-fed beef, or clean dairy, or organic produce, you're right there.
So again, it's that 2020 lesson. It's that take nothing for granted. Everything that you knew is now different and upside down. Hamish, I'm just
Can I just add to that, Andy?
Oh yeah, on you go. Yeah.
Sorry. Just one extra little thing, just picking up on something David said. I get asked a lot because of our Noho's brand pillars. How important is sustainability in the market in general, but in the US. And the trite answer is, if you're not thinking about sustainability, then you're not listening. But the more important answer is, just think about the makeup of the United States market just as one country, and it's playing out globally, really. But in the United States, the biggest single generation in the workforce right now is Gen Z already, and they are reaching financial maturation as a result. And they are very values driven, and they're very self-brand driven. So if you're not thinking in terms of whether or not you are sustainable, whether or not you are net benefit to the world and the way in which you do business, you are not listening to the market changes globally, but particularly in the United States. So get thinking about it.
Get your ears on, I think is what you're saying there, Richard, and get ready to learn again from the start. Hamish, we're running out of time, which is somewhat inevitable given how this conversation's been going. And we need to release everybody to go and get more coffee or pour a glass of Pinot. So I'm just going to go around everybody, starting with you, Peter. Thank you so much for joining us from London. Have you got a parting thought or a parting reason to be cheerful from lockdown London tonight?
Of course, Andy, and I think the key thing is to keep your eyes and ears open to what's happening over here. It's not just UK, but Europe as well. It's a population combined of around 450 million, and they all buy a lot of stuff. So I think the key thing is to sort of see what's happening in terms of Brexit, keep an eye on the FTA, and start speaking to people, start using the network, start thinking about a plan. Because it takes time and it takes effort, and when you're the other side of the world and time zones aren't kind, you need to really start putting your ideas together now. Don't wait. Start thinking, and there's lots of people over here that can help you.
Okay, we'll get a move on. Peter, it's been great having you. Thank you so much. Hunter, over to you. Thank you for joining us again. It's like in a moment of reflection from you, is there a reason to be cheerful about the stability and the strength of what you've told us about China today?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of positivity out of China. I think China's going to drive the world economy for the next wee while. Things are happening pretty good. Online here is growing. The ecosystem in China is more advanced than anywhere else in the world. I see that the American companies are now starting to copy what Chinese have been doing for a while. Another one is to look out for is, everyone will be moving to live stream a lot faster. Yeah. The biggest live stream person here in China did $6 billion US in sales. One person live streaming in the last 12 months. So the ecosystem here it's moving faster, and it's exciting. There's still plenty of opportunities. One last point is that China, like the US, is very complex with lots of different markets. And people see China as one market. It's not at all. Shanghai, for example, Shanghai and Beijing are completely different markets, completely different people, completely different thought processes, and even language. So, and I could name 40 other cities and compare them. They're all different. So, if you're dealing with China, start thinking, how can I target different parts of China or different people, because it's as complex, if not more, than the US.
Fantastic, Hunter. Thank you so much for your insight there. I look forward to having you back sometime soon. Guy, it's been great having you back. Thank you for joining us amidst your move today. So on reflection, a lot of optimism from you and the world in the US. Your final thoughts?
Yeah, I think to touch on something that David said earlier, I think there's never been a better time to try and export to the US. The barriers of being able to do stuff online have been lowered dramatically because of the pandemic. So that's good. I mean, to look at my friend's peanut butter company as an example, Whole Foods, owned by Amazon, they review their peanut butter category, I think, every 2 years. They did that review last year, and now they've just done an off-cycle review just to review Fix and Fog, because they'd heard cool things about it, and they'd seen them in some of the sort of high-end kind of like supermarkets that are in Texas. So I think that's like a good example where, if you've got a good product right now, New Zealand's just like an additional kind of way to get in the door. You might not be able to Hunter's point, like people might not pay a premium for it potentially on the product, maybe, like that's probably fair. Like people like things being green and from a good country and have a good story and that sort of stuff. But, they're a great example of, they've hit the premium end of the market, and now they're sort of opening doors, and they're sort of using the New Zealand angle as like an extra way in. So I really do think, now is the time, if anyone's wanting to export to the States, like there's enough chaos to create opportunity, which is good.
That's a lovely way of putting it. It's been great having you back, Guy. You take care of yourself, mate. Richard, your background looks like a travel documentary right now. It's just ever so slightly distracting. Your reflections, mate, from the side of the beach?
I've got nothing else, Andy. I'm spent. No, I just echo everything the guy just said about the US. Is pretty much what I was going to say. It's
what Guy said.
No time like the present. And if all else fails, just have more time in shorts.
Fantastic. On that note, Dave, you've got the last word on this from Santa Barbara.
I don't think there's a better time to be in the bottom of the South Pacific with a safe, closed border, exporting the shit out of everything you can, including your ideas. Be prepared as you scale up for the inevitable COVID blow-ups that could really throw chaos into your production. So move your ideas offshore. We've got more jazz and envy apples growing in Washington State than New Zealand now, and that's the way to do it. I see these bottled water brands come out of New Zealand, and although the concept is right, clean green water, no, it's completely deaf to the whole sustainability movement that Richard alluded to. So think about internationalization right now. It's a good time.
Yeah, and that's what it's about. And on that note, we better let our audience and let yourselves as panelists go and take on the world. So from Hamish and from myself, a huge thank you to all our panelists, and thank you for joining us and for listening again. And we look forward to seeing you for one last one before Christmas, I think. Hamish, is that the plan?
Yeah, we should do that, shouldn't we? Like a 2020 year in review and predictions for 2021. I think that'll be fun.
We might do the opposite of year in review and just forget about it for a while. The optimism and the energy today is quite infectious. So from this, thank you from us all. We look forward to seeing you again in 3 or 4 weeks' time. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Cheers, guys.